and we saw dictionaries. We saw two heavy topics in the Swift programming language, and we had labs associated with those two topics, right? We saw assert as well in the labs to give us a chance to evaluate our answers, right? So a way to test, hey, is what you just wrote, is it correct? By using the assert function. But today we'll go over two of those questions. We'll go over question 6, which asks, it says, given the variables below, the numbers below, write code that prints the sum of all the numbers is some value followed by the sum, right? If a number is nil, meaning it doesn't exist, don't add it, right? If all the numbers are nil, that means you never added anything, correct? You never added anything, so the answer should be 0. So far, so good? Okay. Now we have this variable here on line 10, var numbers equal to some array, and that has optionals in there. We have int question mark. It tells us it's an array of optional ints. Everybody with me? Okay. And here we were given a for loop. The for loop basically goes through the numbers 0 to 9, doesn't include 10. So far, so good? Right? And there's a statement in there that says numbers that append, right? Append is the way we add to an array. But inside our append function, there's also a statement that says, get me a random Boolean value. So random just gets a random value on the bool, right? So either it gets true or false. If it's true, what statement gets executed in the ternary operator? If it's true. Hands up and then. So Sarah? Everybody heard that? So if my bool.random is true, Zara is saying a random number will get generated from this range here, right? Range 0 to 100. I'll get a random number. The random number lies between 0 and 100. Int.random gets us a random element. Here we could put in any range we want, right? In that case, we say, hey, get us a number between 0 and 100. It could return 100, 99, 75, 0. Everybody with that? Excellent. That number it returns, right? Because yes, you could put statements within your append. Because at the end of the day, what gets returned, right, is a number or nil, which is valid. Either I have an integer or I have nil. They're both valid values for my array of optional ints, right? Because my optional int says either I have an integer or I have a nil value. Everybody with that? So during the lecture yesterday, we actually created an array, explicitly, a literal array, and we put integers in there. We had 4, 5, comma, nil, comma, whatever, 50, comma. This is the same thing. Everybody with me? So there's one of two values. Either I have a valid integer, a whole number, or I have a nil value, okay? Yes? Oh yes, so if true, it gets a random value, it returns it, it appends it to the array. If it's false, it adds nil to the array. Well, we did not get to that part yet. So if false, after the colon here, if I get a false from my random, I get back nil. Everybody sees that? Everybody sees that. Luba? Can you explain to us what's happening on line 12? Exactly. So everybody got that? Luba is saying bool.random gets us true or false. If it's true, it gets us a random number. If it's false, it adds nil to that array. Excellent. And how many elements does my array have? 10, right? 0 to 9. Everybody? Okay. So this loop actually runs 10 times. Yes? Where? Oh, the variable name? So the variable name was ignored here because it wasn't used in the body of the for loop. Make sense? So if I don't use the variable name, I put an underscore. If I keep a variable name and I do not use it, what happens? Well, not a compiler error, but you get a warning message. The compiler says not using variable, either use the variable or use an underscore.
So how do we know that in our array we have 10 numbers?
How do we know? Good question. Anybody wants to volunteer? Yes, Chris, Chelsea.
The range says 0 from less than 10, so it includes the 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So Chelsea is saying we have a range. We saw ranges. The range starts from what value, Julia?
0.
From 0, correct? And what's the last value that's valid here in that range? 0 to 9, correct? So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, correct? Yes? Based on our range. Our range says 0 to 10.
Yeah, but I don't think that there is a connection between large numbers, which has actual array.
Oh, the actual array, right? So each time I go through, every time I go through the for loop, I add a value to the array.
So 0 to 10 represents index.
0 to the range here represents how many times the loop is going to run, right? That's fine. We getting to see all those things for the, first week, second week, right? So we have a range. The range tells the for loop how many times to run, right? Exactly. So for example, let's do an example here. So if I have 4 underscore in 0 to 10, right? That's the same syntax, correct? Everybody with me? And I want to have a print statement in here saying, hello, Julia. It will print 10 times. So far, so good, everybody? But the only difference between this for loop and that for loop is, instead of printing on line 18, I'm appending to my array. I'm adding to my array each time I go inside the for loop, right? So if I have an array here, call it messages, and it's a string, right? Everybody with me? Instead of printing, Julia, I will grab my string and I will say, go ahead, every time I come inside my for loop, append the string Julia, hello Julia, to my array, right? Every time I come inside my for loop here using the range, we agreed this runs 10 times, correct? Now, every time I enter my for loop, I'm doing a statement. Let's see what the statement is doing. It says, messages add this string to my array. Append, the append function, right? The append function is adding, correct? So append adds, right? Adds to array. Do we agree? Okay, so if every time I enter my for loop, I say, hey, add to my array, right? At the end of this for loop on line 21, what's the count of my messages? How many elements is in my messages? There's 10 elements. Everybody sees that? 20. You thought there was 20 elements in there. All that is good. We have to clarify. Messages currently at line 17. Does it have values? It's empty. The first time I come in my for loop, what is the count of messages? 1. Second time? Third time? 10th time? 10. When I finish my for loop, because it's arranged 0 to 10, I've run the thing 10 times, I exit my for loop. At line 21, what is the count of messages? 10, right? We agree, Chelsea? Yeah, if it had values already, you got to count those values as well, right? So, but currently I started out with 0, right? I initialized an empty array, right? Everybody? Oscar, what's that? Parentheses at the end of this guy? Yeah, that's part of the initialization process. You said, hey, go ahead, initialize a string right away for me. Give it back to me right away. So that's the initialization syntax. This is required, right? So far, so good. And we saw we could also do this, Oscar. We saw this before. You could type annotated like that. And you could do this, right? You'll also see that too in some code, right? It says, I type annotated my array, it's type string, and it's empty currently. Cool? And as Chelsea was saying, I could have values here before. Maybe I have a value here. Good morning. At this point, what is the count at 21? At this point, what is the count at line 21? How many elements do I have? That's a good question. Should I bring it on the assessment? 11, right? We started out with how many elements here? 1. And how many elements did we add at the end of the follow? 10. 10 plus 1 is? 11. So far, so good. No, that's fine. That's fine.
No, good morning is the first thing you just added that. So good morning, hello.
Cool? It's good, it's good. Let's print. So print messages, yes.
So for the second one for variables, what that is saying, what it says numbers, the ins and the parentheses, right? So when it says 4, I'm sorry, I don't use that.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Can you scroll up a little bit? So I just want to know what that is. So
Which?
scroll up.
Sorry.
Yeah, at the bottom. So that's basically saying for numbers, because it's empty now, and you put an optional, you put a question mark because it's supposed to be randomized. So it might be false, where false is nil.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're putting, for numbers, you want to add a random rule, whether it's true or false. Now the question mark just says if it's true, right?
Itinerary, yeah.
The itinerary just says if it's true. So if it's true, if the random that you say is out of, it's like a 50-50 chance it will be true or false.
Exactly.
So let's say if it's true, for every time that the random comes and it's true, then you want a random number between 0 and 100.
Right.
But for every time that it's false, you want to add anything to it. Is it also possible?
If it's false, you add nil.
Okay, you add nil.
Yeah.
Because, not 0.
It's just, yeah.
So is it possible that if you want to, you could add 0?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, you can. Instead of
And
nil.
that would be the same as nil. Only nil gives it.
Well, in our case here, we want to have, there's a question B that says sum it up, and if it's nil, do not add, obviously, nil to it. But it could have totally been 0.
So my question now, because 0 is technically a character still.
It's an integer.
It's an integer that it still has. So when it's nil, does that mean that there's no character? No
There's nothing. You cannot use that value. It doesn't exist.
Array, that means like if there's no, if it's nil. In the array, that means that there will be a specific amount of it. If you add 0, let's say it's 10 times. If you add 0 instead of nil, you probably have 10 elements in the array. As opposed to if you add nil.
Exactly, and the average will be different because now the 0 actually counts as well.
Add nine.
Yeah. If you're not adding nil, that shouldn't be part of the average, right? It's like the person did not show up, right? No, it's just nil. So that's why we use the optional syntax to unwrap it. It's not, there's no is empty on there. Cool? If it's a string and it's empty, that's different. Which one? Oh, we're not done yet. That's the question. yeah, I know. So that's the question, but we're clarifying things right now. Everybody's comfortable right now with line 18? Yes. Slack? Oh, right. Just sorry. Let me slack it. Why are you updating now, mister? I said update later tonight. People who live on the edge, please update your software at home. Mr. Had. It wasn't you. Right. That's what Shaggy said. Okay, so We all comfortable with line 18, correct? We comfortable with the print statement having 11 elements? Yes? Jahid? Okay, cool. Let's actually go to question A, was it? Question A says, given the variable numbers, write code that prints the sum. Okay, so go ahead and just copy out what the sum is. That string where it says the sum of all the numbers is, copy that string. And let's go ahead and solve the problem. Okay, excellent. So this is question A here. Question A basically just says sum only non-nil values. Right? In a summary, that's basically what it says. Or add only non-nil values. Right. Okay. Cool. So we were given numbers. Numbers is an optional array of integers. And we have this for loop here that basically creates our array. Everybody with me? Everybody with me? At this point, we could actually just print out what our array looks like. Again, it will be randomized every time we run the application. But if I print out what numbers is, right, it's going to be different for everybody every time you run it. But here I have an optional 3. Do we see that? Everybody sees that. On my screen, I have nil, nil, optional 34, optional 12, nil, 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 right? Exactly. So our mission, should we choose to accept, is to go ahead and evaluate if this is a valid number. If it is, add it to sum. If we see a nil, we don't do anything. If we see another nil, we don't do anything. We see an optional 34, we unwrap it, add it to our running sum. Okay, everybody? So that's where we headed. So now let us do it. So I'll leave that for loop untouched, right? Because that for loop, the only intention of it is to create our numbers array. Everybody with me? Everybody with me? Okay. So we'll go create another for loop. First of all, we need some sort of sum. We'll start out with a sum variable. Why do we need a sum variable? To keep a tally of every time we see a valid number, to add it to sum. So far, so good? Okay. We love for loops, so let's start with a for loop. So for number in numbers. For number in numbers, right? That said, how many times does that for loop run? Jahid, how many times does that for loop run? We actually have an array already, which has elements. And the elements is that range. No, that's okay. 10, right? Greg, you agree it's 10? Oscar, right? Brendan, right? David, we agree it's 10? Any objections before we go on? Or questions? Yes, sir.
So we still count the nil as
As an element, because it's valid because our array is optional. All right, very good. Okay, cool. So now we agree it's 10 times here. Great. Now what else did we learn from yesterday? What type is num? If you option click on num, what type is it? Option click, everybody, option click on num here. Option click on num. What type is num? How many? What type is it? It's an optional integer, right? Do we see that? If we option click on num here on line 31, right? Option click, it's an optional, right? Int question mark. It's not a regular integer. It's an optional integer. The question mark tells us it's optional. Right, everybody? Okay, cool. So this is all good. What else did we learn yesterday? How can we unwrap an optional? Yes, sir. So we could do a default with the nil-coalescing here, right? But what's the default? Okay, 0 is fair. When we're doing our next question, we'll figure that out. But 0 is fair, so walk me through the code. Ahad is going to walk us through the code of unwrapping this using nil-coalescing. Go ahead.
I would do num equals. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. Sum open parentheses num question mark 0. Oh wait, before that, to the left of the open parentheses, can you do sum plus num?
Everybody sees why. So Ahad saw his error before he continued, right? So here, what was Ahad trying to do to sum? He was trying to add it every time, correct? But here, it overrides sum every time. Everybody sees that. So Ahad is like, wait, stop. I need to have a plus equal here. Because if I do not have a plus equal, every time I come in my for loop, it overrides my sum. Do we see that? What's that? Exactly, it's going to replace it, override that value. Okay, so far so good. We have sum plus equal, and if it's a valid number, right, num gets whatever that value is. If it's not a valid number, what number do we get? We get 0, correct? Everybody sees that? Right? In that case, you don't need to really do this, right? No, that's fine. That's okay. If it gives you better readability, go with the parents.
I was going to do sum equals sum plus num for plus equals what was the
You'll get comfortable with it. You'll get comfortable with it. Any questions? Okay, so here we're using nil-coalescing, right? So nil-coalescing to unwrap sum. Right? So far, so good. Questions? Cassandra? All good? Okay, Matt? Full speed ahead? Okay. So here we said we come into our for loop, we unwrap our values num because it's optional. If it has a valid value, great, go ahead and use it. If it doesn't, our nil-coalescing has a default value of 0. Everybody sees that? Okay. So now we could go ahead and print out. If you copy the string, you should probably still have it in your clipboard. So the sum of all the numbers is sum. And we print outside of the for loop. If we print inside of the for loop, the print statement gets executed every time we enter the for loop. But this particular problem, you want to print after the for loop has ended. So you go ahead and you print on line 34. Okay? Well, this is unwrapping already. The nil-coalescing unwraps it. We'll do it using optional binding as well. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Some num crumbs. Thank you, Amini. No. Thank you. So nil-coalescing to unwrap num, right? That makes sense. Not sum, because sum is a valid integer already. Thank you. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run our playground. Right? And again, the sum will be different for everybody, and it will also be different for every time you run the app again. Right? Every time you run, the bool random is randomized. Yes, what's the question?
So relating to that, so the first part is this still also answering question A?
Yeah, that's A.
This is just A.
Yeah, we haven't done B. B is the average.
Okay, so I guess that's what I'm so
With B, we'll do nil-coalescing to do B, just to do something different. Because now this is nil-coalescing. For B, we'll do optional binding.
so for this one, we're saying that for this we're appending if it's not true, we're adding nothing, right? So then where the sum is equal to 0.
0, right? We start out at 0 on line 30.
Saying that for every num now in this new array of numbers that should be filled now with at least 5 integers because we do true false and none. So, well, the big nine.
It depends on the, yeah.
Depends on the thing, right? So for now, for this array, for a number in this
Right,
Whereas, but we know that there'll be a number because there's no number that will be real.
exactly.
So do we still need to have the question mark zero?
Yes, you need to unwrap the num, right? Because if here, if we don't unwrap num, right?
We just assume that there is a number.
Not even that, you get a compiler error. Because you can't add an optional to an integer. Everybody sees that. We have to unwrap that value before we perform the addition operation, right? If I try to unwrap, if I do not unwrap my num is optional, right? My num is optional, my sum is not optional. Everybody sees that? So I have to go ahead and nil-coalesce it in order to add the two together. I could only add an integer with an integer. Cool? Everybody? Okay, let's move to B. Any other questions? Please ask it. The question you're asking, somebody else might also have that question. So this is good. Let's move to B. Yes? If you put 2, then your outcome is going to be wrong. Yeah. In that case, we just add in 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. Right? Does that make sense? If you have a couple values. You have 1, you have 0. What's the answer here? 1. Right? So basically, we're saying don't add, right? Don't add that second element. If it's nil, it's 0. It doesn't count to our sum. Because at the end of the day, our sum is 1. Right? But if you put 2 as your default, our sum becomes 3, right? Which implies all the numbers you see. Okay. No, that's good. Good. Yes, sir.
It's only working this case, but the way I this question was I didn't make an additional numbers since the numbers was already like 0. I assume that's
In that particular question, which is fine, anytime you have a question about a lab or anytime you go to an interview, you're not sure what the interviewer is asking. Hey, I don't understand this question. It's ambiguous. Give me a test case. Give me an example. What are you looking for? Right? See what I'm saying? Come to us. Make sure. Cool?
No, I think the sum
If you put sum in here, every time it's going to change that number, that sum number.
no,
The point of
I mean like the before like I didn't make an additional order, I just like by variable right below.
which is fine. So every time it adds it, you add to the sum.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But in our case here, we don't want to touch the for loop because its only use case is to create the numbers array. But that's also okay what you did. All right, so let's move to B. Okay, so B is asking for the average, correct? So the average of non-nil values. Right? If we go back to B, let's make sure that's what it's asking. So using the same variable, find the average of all non-nil values, right? So the variable we have here is numbers. We'll use a different for loop to show optional binding, right? I'll actually reset my sum here, right? So here we're just clearing sum, right? That's valid. Everybody agree, right? I want to show us a different way to unwrap. So here sum is now 0. We're starting from fresh. Everybody with me? But I can say var sum. Do we agree? Right? Because here we're trying to redeclare sum. But if you want to clear out what sum is, you simply say sum equals to 0. Everybody with me? Okay. So now we'll use a different for loop here. Say for num in numbers. Okay. We'll keep a tally. We need to keep some sort of track, like, hey, how many times did we add a valid number? Right? Everybody with me? How many times did we actually add a valid number? We need to have a count for that in order to find the average. Because we can't simply say sum divided by 10. Do we agree? Because obviously there were nil values in that numbers array. So let's go ahead and create some variable for that. We'll say non-nil value count. Non-nil value count. Assign that to 0. Right? Who knows? There's probably a possibility that it's all nil. I mean, it's very slim, but yes.
So I was wondering for a second, right? When you put a random entry to 0 and 100, I don't know if you 200 bits onto the
No, you shouldn't get 200. Something else is on. No, there's no way you could get 200. So double check what your sum is doing, because the range is 0 to 100. Tony, double check Tiff's computer. Thanks. So, okay, so our second case here, we have average of non-nil numbers. Here we'll use optional binding. Earlier we used nil-coalescing. Let's take a look at optional binding as well. So here we'll use optional binding to unwrap none. Okay? Howard, what's the syntax for optional binding? So if-let, right? Howard says start with if-let, and we'll give it some variable name. In that case, we'll give it unwrap num. And here I'm trying to unwrap num, right? Let's go, come on. Okay? That's the syntax for optional binding. Starts with if-let. It could be if-var. Keep that in mind. If you want to change the value inside of the if-let, it could be if-var, make it mutable. But by default, if-let is the way to go. It's a constant. So if-let, right? First, you look at the optional value. In that case, the optional value is num, right? If it has a valid value, assign it to unwrap num, right? If num is valid, meaning it's not nil, it has a valid integer, I assign it to unwrap num. Everybody sees that, right? Luba? Eric? Okay, so num currently is an optional. We agree? Yes? So the way we read that statement, we say if num has a valid value, go ahead and assign it to my variable here, unwrap num. So right now, unwrap num will have whatever valid value it is. If it's optional 5, unwrap num gets 5. And we could go ahead and use 5 and add it to our sum. So far, so good? Okay, very good. So here, if we're in the let statement, we should start incrementing our non-nil value count. Do we agree? Right? Each time we come in here, that means, hey, we got a valid integer. So valid integer here, right? So increment non-nil value count by 1. You could increment by 2 and 3, etc. By the way, increment doesn't only mean by 1. Everybody with me? I could say increment by 2, by 10, whatever it is. Increment just means add some value to something. In that case, we will say our non-nil value count increment by 1. I could increment by any number, by 100. I could increment by 100. I started by 100, it goes 200, 300, etc. Everybody with me? Before increment, that was the syntax for increment before. You may have seen it in other programming languages, right? It would be whatever the number is plus plus. That means increment by 1. But 2 years ago, I think they got rid of it in Swift, right? 2 years ago-ish, we got rid of it in the language. It was harder for especially beginner programmers to understand what is this syntax, right? So again, Swift is really trying to be modernized and easier to understand as a language. So now increment, we say plus equal 1, right? And decrement is minus equal 1 if you want to decrement by 1, decrease by 1, right? So increment is to add, decrement is to subtract. Yes? One of the things you should, for all of us, right, to keep it up to date here, if we're not in class, right, I'm not, right? If we're not in class, please Look at the videos, which we started doing. Look at the labs. Anything else where you could come in with like some sort of knowledge, ask a peer. So that when we come in, we've seen it or we've done the labs. So we come in, we missed yesterday, we come in, we're like, hey, okay, I have a couple questions. So I come in early to ask one of us like, hey, what's this, right? Because now, like most of us saw it, it's good to review. I love it. But at the same time, like if you haven't seen like the if-let at all, it's good to just at least see what it was before.
I didn't see it, but I went to the yeah, I did look.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. Again, I don't want to like, I'm just like, yeah. Okay, so the question is the if-let, right? Go over that. Again, it's good because the rest of us also, some of us are still seeing it, right? Like, wow, what's this? What's happening? So if, we familiar with if, correct? The keyword if. If says, I'm about to do a condition. If this thing I'm looking at is true, I enter the body of my if statement. With optionals, it's different from the if we saw on Friday. No. 1 week ago, whenever we did control flow. Our control flow was if some condition go inside of it, right? That was it. With optionals, it's slightly different. That's where the confusion might start happening. My condition here, when I say if let, jump to what is after the equal sign, right? To read it better, don't read that part first. Go if this value, num, is valid, meaning if it has a valid integer, then put that value inside of this variable called unwrap num. Okay? Now unwrap num has a value, correct? Now we could go ahead and use it inside the if-let block. Okay? Everybody with that? Cool? So that's how the if-let works. And what are we doing now? So we have our non-value count. Great. What else we need to do? We unwrap num. Yeah, what are we doing with unwrap num? I'm sorry? We have to sum it, right? Part of it is we try to find an average. So how can we find an average without a sum? Right? So we need to use our sum here. So let's do the same syntax we did earlier. So sum plus equal to unwrap num. Right? Everybody? Can we do num here? Can I put num here? Doesn't compile, right? So I can't put num here. It doesn't compile. Why? Because num is still an optional. Okay? Value of optional int must be unwrapped to a value of type regular int. Okay? I can't add an optional int to an int. So that's why we have to unwrap it. Does that clear it up, Tiff? Okay, cool. So now here, instead of num, we say unwrapped num. The compiler is happy. I have an int here. I have an int here. Let's double check. We option click on unwrap num. It's a regular integer. There's no question mark. At this point in the code, it has been fully unwrapped. Everybody with me? But here, it's optional. Okay, cool. So we have some, we have this, we are good. At the end of our for loop, we could go ahead and do our average. So here I could say print the average of the number values is. An average we have here is sum divided by non-nil values. Right? Now let's go ahead and print, or rather run the application. The average of the four, in that case, there were only four non-nil values. The average of the four non-nil values is 53. Right? Everybody with that? We could print out the actual values here if we want. So numbers. just to see what the values are. Run the code. Right? So here we have the average of the 3 non-nil values is 45. Every time you run it, you'll get different values. Do we agree? Right? So here, let's see. So you have 3, you have 1, 2, 3. Do you see the 3 on my line? I have optional 42. That needs to be unwrapped. I have optional 81. That needs to be unwrapped. I have optional 14. 3 non-nil values. You take those numbers together, you divide them by 3, you get 45. Everybody with me? Okay, cool. So that was part B. Scroll up, yes. Let me see if I can get the entire screen actually. In the back, can we see? Say that again. Oh, the light? How many? You want me to scroll up? This is fine? Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is part B. The entirety of part B is on screen. We're finding the average of the non-nil values of numbers. We started off by saying sum is 0. And we kept track of how many valid values we were adding with this variable called non-nil value count. We entered our for loop. And how many times is our for loop getting executed? 10 times. Why 10 times? If you scroll up in your code, you'll see the range 0 to 9. Cool. And we are unwrapping our value because we can add an optional int to a regular int. Everybody? Yes? Sering? Chelsea? Good? Okay. And here we're keeping track of how many times we have non-value counts. So that becomes part of our equation to solve the average. We have the sum numerator, we have the denominator, which is the amount of values, valid values. And we go ahead, we execute our average here. Using string interpolation, we have our average, we are good to go. Any other questions with optionals in that particular question? Yes, sir? Oh, because the only time it's a valid number, it gets in this body here. If it's nil, it doesn't get into that body. Do we agree? Everybody, do we agree? That's very important. If num is nil, we do not get into line 43, 44, 45. Do we see that? Basically, if it's nil, it's false. If it's false, it never enters an if statement. Right? So if it's nil, it doesn't enter the body there. Do we agree with that before we move on? Everybody, do we agree? Raise your hand if you agree. Anna doesn't agree? Yes. Raise your hand. Keep your hand up if you agree, because I'm not moving forward. Oscar, I don't see your hand. All right, cool. So far, so good. I'm happy now. Or am I? Are you really agreeing, or just agreeing to agree? All right. So we only get in the if let if the value is valid. If it's nil, we don't. You could have an else statement to capture a nil, right? In that case, we don't care about nil. Yes?
So for part A, we're adding to our array numbers, right? And we're adding the
Part A, we're only interested in the sum of the valid values.
right, but the sum comes from the array of numbers that
Yeah, from numbers, yeah.
right. So then the first one are random, whereas for part B, they're no longer random because now we're only choosing from the values that are in our array. So if the first
Well, every time we run our playgrounds, it's
gonna be different.
yeah. But it's from the same numbers, yeah.
It's from the numbers that whatever collection is in that.
Exactly. The same variable. Remember the question asked, use the same variable.
Yeah.
So we're using the same variable numbers.
Okay.
Cool? Good. Okay. Move on, we good? We good, everybody? All right, great. Let's move to the last question of the review here. So we also saw dictionaries yesterday, right? So here we have a dictionary question, question 4. You are given an array of dictionaries. It tells you already what the thing is, right? An array of dictionaries. We could have an array of strings, we could have an array of booleans, we could have an array of custom types, array of anything. Here we have an array of dictionaries. Each dictionary in the array describes the score of a person, right? Find the person with the best score and print his or her full name, guys. I did this, right? What happened there? So you're given an array of dictionaries. Each dictionary in the array describes the score of a person. Find the person with the best score. I'll really change this best to highest, right? What's best? What does that mean? Right? So find the person with the highest score and print his or her full name. So far, do we understand what the question is asking for? Right? Now let's go to syntax. Yesterday, for the first time, we saw what a dictionary looked like. Where I'm highlighting, this is a dictionary. Forget about the other square brackets outside. Within this array is a dictionary. What type is my key? A string. What type is my value? A string. It's a dictionary where the keys are strings and the value is also strings. We understand that part. That's good. We know our array syntax starts with a square bracket, ends with a square bracket, right? So this here itself is an array, correct? Yes? So we have an array of dictionaries. We use dictionary literal. This is a dictionary literal where you initialize your variable with contents of a dictionary, right? So this is a literal. My key here is first name. I have a next key called last name, score, etc. We know that we can't have, our keys needs to be unique. So far so good? If we say we have first name here, like that, and we try to run our playground, right? We have an error. What's the error say? Hopefully it says something good. Well, that error doesn't help me. So you need to go to your console and see if there's a better error. Fatal error. That's a crash. That's 1 star in the Apple Store. But in our case, we get that crash before we push our app, right? Because that's a compiler error, right? You run it, you compile it, you get a crash. You love those crashes, right? As opposed to shipping your app, somebody clicks on an image, it crashes, which is a runtime crash. So compiler crashes are good. Fix the thing before you ship it. But the error says, dictionary literal, what does it say? Contains duplicate keys. So let's review dictionaries a little bit while we're doing that question. So a dictionary, part of a dictionary, the best part of a dictionary is the keys are unique. There's no way I should or can or possibly have 2 first name keys. It will be impossible for me to know what's Calvin's last name or first name. It's all confusing. Is his first name Calvin or is his first name Newton? I don't know, right? So dictionaries force us to write correct code with our intention of having a first name which is unique and having a last name, fix our code, having a last name which is also unique. Everybody on me? Everybody on the same page here with me, right? So we spoke about briefly how we get a unique key, the internals of that. We spoke about hash and how there's a hashing algorithm. You give your dictionary a key, you get back a hash, forget about like the intricacies of it until later into the units. But we get back a hash value. That's the way the dictionary itself enforces uniqueness, right? So it has to conform to hashable. We spoke about that too, right? So our dictionary keys, whatever key we have, it needs to conform to what? Hashable, right? It needs to conform to hashable. So string conforms to hashable. Yes? It changes. So every time, if I run that, first name will have the same hash value as whatever other first name you have. So if I have 2 first names here, every time I run the code, they both will have the same hash value. You see what I'm saying? You agree? Okay. So Jahid is saying, hey, but the hash values are different every time. Yes, they are. And that's why they're not ordered. A dictionary is not ordered. But it still preserves uniqueness. Because that hash value, if I run my code the first time, my name is Alex, my hash value is 1234. Next time I run my code, my hash value is 456. It's still 456 for my name. So I can't use my name again. You see what I'm saying? No matter what instance you run that program on, that hash value remains constant throughout that run of the program. Does that make sense? That's why we couldn't do first name twice. Even if every time you run it, the hash value itself is different, but the hash value remains constant for that string. Cool? The other side doesn't matter. Value is not hashable. Okay, so very good question. So our key, the first part of the dictionary, needs to be hashable in order for it to be unique. The second part, the value, we don't care what we put in there, right? It could be anything. But in our case, we type safe it, it needs to be a string, right? But the type itself doesn't have to be hashable for the value. But we'll talk more about, yes, sir. Can value exist? Can value exist without a key? Well, that's an array. Are you talking about an array? You mean like not have a key for it? Well, the key itself, we could not have a key for it like that, but that's still empty. It's harder to find it. Because part of like searching for a value is knowing how to get the key. Oh, having no value.
So nil key and there's not value.
So let's see. So you need to have a key in order to have, your value could be empty. In our case, I could have Calvin having an empty string. But I can have the vice versa. I could, but it's harder for me to search that empty string. Because the empty string itself, right, like I'm lost. Give me an example. Like, just doesn't exist like this, like that. You get a compiler error here, right? Right, what is the compiler saying? Nil is not compatible with expected dictionary key type string. Because already we have string here, type safe in it, so we need to have a string for the key. You could have any for your key, but any itself might not work. Let's do an example. So let's go. 1 second, just want to confirm something. So we could have some sort of dictionary here, type any. Let's see. Any itself doesn't conform to a string. Any itself I don't think conforms to, okay, there it is. So it doesn't conform, right? So any, which is any object, it doesn't conform to hashable. So we cannot do that. Whatever your key is, whatever you say your key is, has to be hashable. And if you provide a key, you got to give it a value. Does that make sense? You could have a key mapped to nil values. You could have a dictionary like we had the array of optionals. You could do that. Like I could say, create some string here. Create some string where the values could have or not have a value. I could do that. So that way my key might have or not have a value, right? We need to give it an initializer, so let's do this. You could do that. So your keys is a string, but your values could have a string or nil. Does that help you? But you can't go vice versa. The keys cannot be nil. Because the value itself has to be, the key itself has to be hashable. And nil is nothing. Cool? But grab me offline if you want to go deeper, or what use case you're trying to go for. Yes, sir? For now, for the scope of the class, understand that hashable makes the key unique. Unique. And the key needs to be unique in a dictionary. Okay? For the scope of what we're doing right now, that's what we need to know. When we go into hash tables, hash algorithms later in the course, Unit 4, we'll talk more about hashing and hash tables. Cool? Dictionaries hangman. Oh, no. I did that without any dictionaries. You're good. I'm thinking about labs. Good. I'm thinking ahead. Thinking ahead. Any other questions? So all what we need to come out of this class knowing for now is our keys needs to be unique. Everybody? And we saw why, and we know why. We saw why, we know why. The why is how can I access something if all the keys are the same? It's impossible. How do I know Calvin's last name? Right? Now it's unique. I say person first name, I get Calvin. Person last name, I get Newton. There's no confusion. Cool? All right, great. So we know what we're after. Okay, so let's answer the question here. How do we access what's inside of an array? How do we access the contents, the elements? Index is one thing. If I want to access all the elements in an array. I'm sorry? So a for loop, right? So I'll start with a for loop. I'll say for person in people, right? Right? So we use a loop to access every element in an array. That's the fastest way to access that. If you want to access every single element individually. In that case, this for loop goes through the people with scores based on how many counts it has, right? If we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So that for loop runs 5 times. Do we agree? Right? It runs 5 times. Each time it goes through this option click. Make sure you option click on person dict here. It's no longer an array of dictionaries, right? Did we option click on person dict here? Did we? What type is it? I hand generic, I hand dictionary, I hand array, I'm in string. It's a dictionary, right? According to Tiffany? Do we agree? No, it's not. Right now, we're inside of the array. And we're looking at an individual element in that array. So how do you know the type of element you're looking at? Quick way is to option click right after the for, and it tells us it's a dictionary where the keys are strings and the values are strings. There was a hand and a yawn. Yes, that's a good way to see it. Exactly. You see square brackets, you see 2 types and a colon in between, it's a dictionary. It's not a tuple. Cool? So far, so good? Yes. Also good way to see a tuple. Yes. All right, cool. So we have our dictionary. This is great. What else we need to do here? We need to find out the highest score. Correct? And we've seen before, the best way to track anything, when somebody asks you, like, hey, find the highest score in this. Find the smallest in that. Right? Find the middle of this, whatever. Start thinking, how can I track, right? That's the question, right? That's what the question is saying. How can I track who has the highest score? I could create a variable, right? We like variables. That's why we started with variables. Variables are great for storing information. I'm sorry? Say that again. No, ask your question. I'll come back.
So in this one, to find the highest score, could we make it as in like you have to find a variable to equal
The current one you're looking at?
the current one you're looking at, but you have to access the key, right?
Yes. So
the key score.
we get in there. I know you missed yesterday, but you're ahead. I see you. Okay, we get in there. So let's write it out. So we'll create some variable here called highest score. Start at 0. Right? That's a good place to start. So we start at 0. Great. But we need other things, right? The question also asks, I want to know the person's name, their full name. Do we have full name there anywhere? No. But we know how to make a full name from first name and last name, right? Using concatenation. We add them together. So far, so good? So here, I'll create some other variable. Call it, if we create the, if we create the variable inside of the for loop. Oh, you want to talk about the problem? Forget about the actual, what they gave us. Right? Problems come in different ways. For now, we just create our own variable name. Okay, so let's create a variable name there. What's the name? Person's high score, person full name? Just full name? Full name is fine. Okay, full name is fine. So here we have higher score, which is great. Now we know if we're looking at the higher score, that has to be the person's, we have to get the person's full name at that point, right? So there we have a full name variable. We have a full name variable, we have a higher score variable. We are good to go. We could track stuff. Higher score is integer and full name is string. Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Yulia. Guys, you saw a problem here? Right? But you know what? Keep it like that for now. We'll convert it. We love optionals. So we'll make higher score an integer. Even if it's a string here, right now. Okay? Exactly. But we'll keep it as an integer. Okay? Because we love conversions, right? Or we should love conversions. We'll get, we have optionals, we know how to move a number, right? Right? So here, our 16, we know how to make it a string, or an integer rather, and optional, unbind it, right? It's good practice. So in that question, we're doing optionals and dictionaries. Cool? All right, good. So let's see. So we have person here. We need to extract, what we need to get? We need to get the score, right? So let's get the score. So let's create some let here, score as string, because it is a string. How do we get the person's score? Hands. How do I get that person's score? For example, Noel. How do I get his score? Using a dictionary. Hands? Yes, Mr. Saren. So call the dictionary name, which is person, right? And then score. What am I typing after this? Okay, so subscript, right? And then what else? Score, like this? Okay. So in quotes, right? Score like this, right? So we agree, everybody? Because we can't index into a dictionary using integers, like 0, 1, 2, we can't access dictionaries that way. We access dictionaries via the key. And Mr. Sering is saying, go ahead, access the score using the key score. Exactly. Now, the next question. There could be a value, or maybe it's nil. Because what if I say person's age here? Do we have a person's age? Do we keep track of the age? No. So that's not valid. So the compiler gives us this opportunity here to have an optional here. They might have a value, or they might not have a value. So we have to unwrap it. We love optionals. So here we have score. To verify it is an optional before I even unwrap anything. Option click on score as string. What type is it? Chelsea, what type is it? Option click. I know you're writing. Writing is good, but also doing. So option click on score as string. Optional string, correct? Cool. Good. Now, we're trying to unwrap this. This is great. I could give it some default value. For here, just nil-coalescing. And if there's no score, let's just give it 0 for now. Right? That's valid. So now, by doing the nil-coalescing, just those two points of syntax here, double question mark, followed by a default value, Option click again on score as string. What type is it now? Chelsea will tell us. Fake typing. Okay, Ian, what type is score as string? It's a regular string, right? Regular string because we just used the nil-coalescing operator. We unwrap the value. So we unwrap the value, so now either it has a valid score or it just has 0. Everybody with me? Great. So now we have score as string. Great, great, great. Next thing we're going to do, because we love optionals so much, why not do more of it? Let's do score as int. As the variable name implies, we want to get an integer. Right, Julia? Because Julia pointed out, hey, we have a variable highest score, which is an integer. What are we doing? So let's get that integer from that score string. Right? So we'll use our integers initializer. We'll put score string in there. Right? And now option click again on score as int. Brendan, what do we have? What type is score as int? Score as int. So it's optional int, right? As Mr. Brandon is saying. Because right now, what are we doing? We're saying, hey, use this integer initializer with our string here. Try to convert it to an integer. It might not be valid. Right? We agreed. We saw that already. It might not be valid. So either we have nil, right? In that case, let's do nil-coalescing again. So if it's nil, we just return 0. Right? And Mr. Brendan will tell us what score as int is again now. What score as int, as we use nil-coalescing. So now it's a regular integer. So we're good, right? We are at a good place now. We have a regular integer. We could make a comparison with an integer. Chelsea, what's your hand up? Try to say that again, sorry. What line number? Score as int here. And int. So, sorry. Score as int, right? Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So now we have score as int, which is a regular integer. We can make our comparison now. So we could say if score as int is greater than highest score, right? At this point here, if we get inside the if statement, we found a score that's higher than the previous score. Do we agree? The first time we get into our for loop, what's the highest score? 0. If we're looking at the first person here, Calvin, what's Calvin's score? 13. Is 13 higher than 0? Should we enter in our if statement? Well, we should in that case because we just validated that Calvin's score is higher than 0. So our current highest score should be Kelvin's score. Our current highest score should be Calvin's score, right? Right? If our current highest score is 0, we're looking at Calvin. Should we leave Calvin and keep it at 0? Christian? No, but you agree, right? Okay. We saw replace yesterday. We'll see replace again later today. Values. So you index the key and you just give it a value.
But I'm saying like for this, like if score as in is greater than the highest score, then like you place highest score with score.
We're doing that now. Yeah. That's part of the if. Our if doesn't have any code right now. So we need to add that logic. That's what we're coming now. So if we come here and we look at Calvin, right? Calvin score is currently 13, right? So is 13 more than 0? Everybody, is 13 more than 0? Yes. So we come inside of our if statement. And our highest score now should be score as int. Correct? which is 13, example 13. It is going through all of them. That's only the first one. Next time, we're going to go through a different person. Next time, we'll go through Gary. Right? Gary's going to be 23. Is 23 more than 13? So highest score is going to be 23, correct? Then we go through Leah. Is 10 more than 13? So we keep highest score at 23, correct? Next, we go to Sandra. Right? Is 3 greater than 23? Same as Noel. Is 16 greater than 23? So at that point, we end our for loop, and our current highest score is Gary, right? So far, so good, but we have more things to do. We need to get Gary's name. We have the highest score, great, we have 23. We could end there and just index the highest score, but that's not good. What if there's 2 highest scores? Or sort like that. So here, let's just capture the full name. I will say again, this gives us good practice with optionals. I need to get Gary's first name using nil-coalescing. So somebody's going to come up and do it. Chelsea's going to come up and do it. Right. So we're using nil-coalescing. Basically, you want to access the first name. So if you scroll up, that's good. So first name, the key is first name, correct? Everybody? Okay, so scroll down. So now you want to use the dictionary name. In that case, it's person dict. So type in person dict. And the way we access a key is using subscription, square bracket, and first name is a string.
Oh. Right?
It needs to be spelled the same way because you won't find it. That's very good. Now you need to go ahead. This is an optional. If you option click on first name, option click on first name. So it's a string optional, right? We all agree? But we do not want an optional, so we'll use nil-coalescing here. It's faster to achieve what we want as opposed to optional binding. Everybody? Okay, so now you put 2 questions. Very good. And then you will put some default value. In that case, you will put no first name.
Okay. I don't know why I'm typing it.
Put a close quote. And then option click on first name. At this point now it should be unwrapped, correct? Mm-hmm. So either we have the person's valid first name or we have no first name, correct? Give it up for Chelsea, thank you. We have to do last name. So you guys do last name. And when I'm satisfied that you did it, I'll do it here. So let's practice using. I see where you're going, but first do last name first. So declare some constant last name. Use our dictionary to access the last name key. And give it a default value in the case there's no last name. So we type in that. So on line 92. It depends on what you want to do here. You don't have to. You could just say like no first name like this. That's just a string. It's up to you what you want to put there. But yeah, good question. Or you could give them a name if you want, right? John or Jane. Jane Doe. What's that question? Make sure you type in it the same. So make sure the string is the same. If the string is all lowercase, it's not going to work. It's not going to find it. So one way we'll see later is to create constants, right? One way we'll see later is when you have multiple strings, you want to create constants so that you're not making mistakes. Cool? All right, so let's do last name since we all did it. So last name here is person. We access last name. Again, it needs to be the same as it needs to match the key in the dictionary. Everybody agree? Does everybody agree? If I have a lowercase n here, will it work? Exactly. Good, good, good. Okay, cool. So now I could give it a default last name. Cool? So now we have a first name, we have a last name. We could build our full name, correct? So we have our full name variable. So I say full name equal to first name plus last name. No, they have to be the same type. In our case right now, we have 3 strings. We could add 3 strings together, but we can add a string to an optional. You mean like this? You could compare 2 optionals together, but you can add them together. Okay? That's why we needed to unwrap it earlier. Yes, sir.
I guess I was having difficulty trying to wrap my brain around how is it that
What part?
when we get the score, right?
The score,
the
the score.
highest score. How does it know that when we put in the full name, the first name and the last name, that's going to be the same guy with the highest score?
Oh, because that's the person you're currently looking at.
I'm just so confused.
That's why we changed it yesterday. We changed the name. Let's change it again today. Change person dict here to command click person dict here, and change it. Edit all in scope, right? Everybody? Do that. Say current person. Spell out the whole thing until we're more comfortable with it. Does that help you? No, but yeah. You said no, but yeah. Okay, so let's rename it again. So command click on the thing you want to change. Command click, the dialog box comes up. You go down to edit all in scope. Do we see that? You click on it, and as you type in, it changes everything that's in the scope of that program. Okay, so Ahad, as we're going through our for loop, the current dictionary looking at, everything here is that same person. Everything in that block is that particular individual we're looking at.
Oh, so we're not looking at one whole dictionary. We're looking at like 5 different ones.
Yes.
Oh.
That's very good. I love those questions. So, question is, what are we looking at? Are we looking at that entire thing at once? No. We're looking at each element. Each element, this is an element. This is a dictionary. Everybody? That's element 1. Element 2 is Gary. Element 3 is Leah. Element 4 is Sanja. Element 5 is Noel. Everybody? Everybody. So as we're going through an array of anything, we're going through the individual elements. So every time we get here, we're looking at some individual, right? Not the entire array, right? The entire array would be all the 5 dictionaries. But for every array element, we're looking at a particular dictionary at a time. Yes, sir.
So it's like we selected Gary because he had the highest score.
Yes.
So because he had the highest score, we're rolling Gary.
Exactly. So nothing else overrides Gary. If we have somebody else in here that we added with 50, that person would be the highest scorer. Cool? All right. So, no, that's good. Yes, sir.
And that's happening because it's all in the same for loop?
Yeah. The same for loop goes through the entire array. It goes through 5 dictionaries.
Like it's not from someone else's name, it's all of them.
Exactly. So anytime you're looking inside that for loop, it's one person you're looking at, right? So we could put a print statement somewhere as we go inside the for loop here, and we could say print currently looking at some first name. We need the first name. So first name we have already, but that's fine. Currently looking at dictionary here. Nope. That's why the longer names are harder. Here. Person, dictionary here. And here is first name, right, everybody? Right? So as we look through our dictionary, we'll see who we're currently looking at. Okay? And at the end, we'll just put an extra, we'll put a new line here so there's spaces in between the people we're looking at. Let me take that lower so we have to see all the code. Okay, this is the entirety of the code here. Make sure we all have it, and then we'll test it out. Because actually, we haven't printed out who the person is. Make sure you have this typed out, and then I'll go ahead and print at the end of the for loop who's the highest scorer. Yes. That's fine. At the end of the day, it worked, right? That's called brute forcing it, right? Get the thing to work first, then you could optimize it, right? We don't feel, oh, I didn't get it right away. You got the answer. That's the most important thing. Second thing is, hey, how can I make that code cleaner or more optimized? You with me? Have we typed everything in?
No.
Can I scroll up? Oh yeah, we'll talk about big O, about nesting loops and stuff like that. But in that case, we're just doing it n. This is just linear. It just goes through the thing once. Yeah, that's why we review sometimes. So we're all on board with like what the solution looks like. Yeah, Tiff. Can I scroll up? Can I scroll up?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not gonna do the entire scroll up, but I'll scroll up to print out the last statement. Is that good? Okay, so here at the end of it, we want to see who the print end will just create a new a space between who we're currently looking at. Okay, so here we'll say the highest scorer. Well, full name is the highest has the highest score of highest score. Cool. So let's test that out and come back to explaining anything here. So look, so we found Gary. He has the highest score of 23, right? Gary McKenzie here has the highest score of 23, which makes sense based on the data we have. And we have some print statements, or maybe, yes, we have print statements. So if we go through the print statements, let's give ourselves some context here. So we first look at Calvin. Do we agree? Everybody? Right, this is Calvin. Can I scroll up? Should I stay here? Can I scroll this up to see Calvin? Okay, so we have Calvin here. We first look at Calvin. Then we look at Gary, according to the console. Then we look at Leah. Sandra, and Noel, correct? So every time we enter this for loop here, we're looking at a new dictionary. While we're looking at a dictionary, everything in here is that current person we're looking at. Everybody with me? Right? The only time we start changing scores is when we come back inside the for loop and the highest score is higher than the previous score. We have our previous score, it's highest score, we're keeping track of it. Right? We're keeping track of it here. If we encounter a higher score than the current highest score, we change it. Right? We change it on line 91. And we also keep track of the person's full name. Everybody with me? Everybody with me? Cool? Any questions?
Yeah, I don't know what Bowen
You got who? Bolin?
the last one.
I'll slack out and then we'll go over it if you have anything offline. But based on the code we wrote, you should get Gary. Yes, Chelsea? Okay, so I'll slack this out so we're all on the same page, and we will take a break and come back to talk about sets. So I'll stop it here.